Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Nate here on the Artist Exchange Media Hub. We're doing a special collaboration with this gentleman sitting to that side of me, Mr. Alan Gray. Um, we will be doing like a seven-part mini series on just topics that affect Black men, Black culture, and just people in general right now. Um, I've been watching this young man for the last like week or so, and we had met before, and I just like his messaging. I like his point of view, and even though we may not see eye to eye on everything, I just like the fact that he has an opinion and he's not afraid to display it in a world right now that we're living in. Um, Everything just feels so sensitive. And you can't say this and you can't say that because somebody's going to take offense. And for me, it's a scary place to be in because you don't often know where the triggers lie. And this conversation is definitely in line with um, having the hard conversations and bringing up issues that really affect people and befitting that is from a male's point of view and a male's perspective. I'm not trying to tell any woman or any other culture how to be who they are, but simply these are things that affect me, affect Alan, and we want to have a conversation over it. So, stay locked in. I want Alan to one, introduce himself and let us know who he is and how this all came to be for him.
Okay. Um. Well, salute everybody. It's an honor. You know what I mean? Like you said, we did meet before. I actually see his episodes on Facebook. The Artist Exchange.
Mm,
So it's kind of dope for you to reach out, and I definitely appreciated it too, just to be a part of it. I've been doing a podcast, Nerd Rap podcast for years. Was just to give different perspective on what we consider masculinity, because I feel
hmm
like the concept that is often showed about Black men at times is destructive, and it's
mm,
not conducive to healthy, average young man growing up, having emotional maturity, uh, understanding of who he is. Of I feel like the imagery of Black men not being vulnerable, having to be a certain way to be accepted. I feel like it's counterproductive in a way. So
right.
a lot of the perspectives I try to do is just from the guy who isn't street savvy, who may didn't grow up influenced by the mass media depiction of what a Black man is. So you kind of feel
hmm
weird and ostracized, like, okay, well, I don't do this. And that's generally the perspective of the nerd, the geek, the that's why I call it nerd rap. Like, it's the nerd. Like, I'm not the street guy, but I wanted that perspective still valid because it's still a spectrum of Blackness. So, you know, but on all streaming platforms and stuff like that for podcasts. So if you want to check it out, I got like almost 300 episodes of just me ranting about topics and stuff like that. So yeah.
That's what's up. I like how these podcasts, and this is a double-edged sword. It has allowed us a voice and a space to be able to tell our individual perspectives without a lot of, well, I can't even say without a lot of feedback because people still talk in the comments or about certain things. But I just like how these podcasts and lives have allowed people to have a voice that we didn't have when I started all of this. So when the Artist Exchange was born, it was at the same time that Facebook was being born. You had to have
Yeah.
a, a college email address to even join. And I remember being in college and not being a little weary of it because of the obvious, it's grown to be the negative, but also feeling really inspired because I wanted to be able to connect with people that weren't in my four block 410 443 radius.
Right.
And it definitely gave me a lot of connections and, meeting people who, I would not have met on any other terms like yourself. And and being able to voice opinions and network and share ideas and really solve some issues. In the time that I've been doing the artist exchange, it really has um, opened my eyes to things that I would have normally not even thought about because it wasn't arts related. And I've been able to kind of draw connections with a lot of creatives and non creatives and kind of what can we do? How can we solve an issue? How can we work together? How can we showcase this? And this is one of my avenues. Thanks to the pandemic, everything is virtual now, which is taking things to another level in podcasting because you don't necessarily have to be in a specific space with someone. And we can have these two conversations from miles away.
Right.
Um, but we have a couple topics, seven to be exact, that we wanted to touch on. And the first one, you can see it in the topic in that yellow arrow. How important is Black representation, just in general, period? I posted this a couple days ago, but I specifically left out the word Black and let people have their way with it. And a lot of people did not want to respond and they actively wrote on there, I don't know how to answer this or I don't. And then other people came on there with a direct perspective. And it was very interesting how, initially people didn't know how to answer it. And I think because we're in a space right now where representation is overflowing and everyone is having a perspective, and we now having perspectives that we didn't even know we were missing. But it's still interesting, even today, people don't know how to answer that question. So I'll first give it over to Alan and see what your perspective and what your point of view in that
Right.
statement is.
Um, as far as Black representation, to me,
Hmm.
it's super important, and it's important again because we're not a monolith, and I think that's
Right.
the big thing with a lot of of the representation of Black people that we had since the entertainment industry. It was a select few versions of Blackness that were shown in terms of how a man
Hmm.
is shown, how a woman's shown, how someone called out a Tyler Perry movie, all the evil guys be dark skinned brothers and all the saviors be light skinned brothers. It's
Hmm.
so like there's always a depiction of how Blackness is shown. So like you said, I it's a positive and negative. I feel all spectrums of Blackness should be represented in a healthy and honest way. I do. I feel like there should be no spectrum of our diaspora that's demonized, whether
Hmm.
they are a man this way or they're a man that way. Even if we don't agree with that or we don't agree with a lifestyle choice, whatever, they don't need to be demonized in media because if we demonize these aspects of our Blackness in media and it's not represented in a way that's regular,
Hmm.
that can lead to people's perceptions of that spectrum of Blackness being negative. So to me, it's really important. It's always important that as many Black voices as possible are at least given a chance to show that, hey, I'm not what these people represent me as. I'm a multifaceted human being, and that's perfectly fine. I feel more than ever, we've had more representation, whether it be for women, especially because for every 7 Black dudes that you'll see in 100 cast movie, it'd be 5 Black women, and they all fill the same role. So when we're seeing multifaceted depictions of Black women, Black men, Black trans, Black gay, anyone, and they're being represented in a way that's healthy, and they're being shown in these different perspectives,
Hmm.
I feel it's
Hmm.
positive. I feel because we're not a monolith. We're not just one homogenous. This is what a Black man and woman are. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person because you don't fit that particular box of what they describe Black men and women to be. So
I,
I feel
I
it's super
see,
important.
I see, I see where you're coming from. I, I often see the exact opposite happening. I see
Mm,
being as though we have all of these platforms and all these perspectives and opinions, people are still marginalizing people into little boxes. And I've always typically, and with the labels and we're still not allowing people, and I don't need your permission, but we have to recognize that your collective voice can stop my progress or make
Yeah.
my progress difficult or hard. And part of that is well, what I'm seeing now is that's still happening. People are still boxing people in, not allowing people to live their life freely and openly. And then we still have a lot of stuff that's happening in the dark because people aren't allowed to be their complete, full facing selves. I definitely agree with you, but it's I don't know what it's going to take for people to just simply mind your own business and
Um,
let people. I mean, it feels simple, but mind your
it
business.
if you want to be 1,000 when it comes to a lot of how we learn to express blackness,
Hmm.
it like me and my man was talking about the other day. Like a lot of it is internalized self hate
Hmm.
because you got to think like how we interpolate what a black man should be was us trying to emulate, white patriarchy and what a typical successful white man would be in society. So
Hmm.
if they don't like homosexuals, if they don't like women speaking out and this and in turn, we internalize a lot of those dynamics, and we internalize as simple as a man not, a man being too respectful, a man not being assertive and aggressive, and certain aspects we looked at as a man, we took from the powers that be, and now we have
Hmm.
a, a pigeonholed view of us. So, like when I was growing up, and I'd be around a whole bunch of street dudes, and I pull out comic books, that's a problem. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, this ain't the wave. Something that simple. So imagine somebody on the outskirts of what's acceptable to masculinity. We don't want to
Hmm.
see that. And even though there's more black media and more black platforms, that internalized self-hate has never been addressed, and we've never directly confronted it. So we're still following the same rubric of old, if that
Right.
makes sense.
But it feels strange because some of those things, like that example, the comic book kid. Now, it I can't take the waves of what bringing things into the light or what's popular because now everything is Marvel. Those things that used to be ridiculed and teased is now a part of pop culture. And instead of allowing people to just simply be themselves and allow them space to be themselves, we don't do that. We wait until
Yeah,
something is trending, and often the trend started with us, things that we secretly like, things that were a part of our being anyway. And then when it becomes popular, now we are fighting to be the originator or the creator or putting
right.
our name on it or being associated with it. And it's, you
I
know,
can tell you, it's so
mhm,
sad. I've had dudes like I've been in the combos my whole life. What's so sad is the inboxes, not publicly. Publicly, the same people support me, or the same people support me all the time. The
mhm.
inboxes. Oh man, I'm really into comic books like that. I'm secretly a nerd too, bro. Why are you secretly a nerd?
Well, because I mean, honestly, it just wasn't popular at one time. It wasn't something that was looked at as, popular. And we still have a subculture that is very slow to grow outside of what the norm was. And we can't pretend like we didn't set it up to be that way. We
No,
didn't tease
I
the
get
person who was the anime kid.
yeah, we get the dynamic. I mean, I got it. I think it's
Hmm.
just the major thing of to me, it's always been sad because it's like we pigeonhole simple shit. Like, bro, like
Hmm.
if you're into even say get out of comic books, like I know some people may not be into rap, certain
Right.
rap artists or certain musical genres. And you listen to it, you'll be the one dude listening to it, but when it becomes popular, now everybody wants to come to you, be like, "Oh my gosh, man, this is so fire!" And it's like, why did that have to become popular to the mainstream for you to now be comfortable with stepping outside of your
But
box?
it's weird because a lot of it comes from out, it originated in our culture. And
Right,
it is a space where we fall behind our own trend setting and we don't accept it until it's on a major, you know, uh, catwalk or some fashion magazine or some white publication. Or the whole idea. of, say, Marvel. That's a great example. Marvel or comic books, or I remember those things being cool up into a certain age, and then you were weird, but still liking it.
Straight up.
It was one of the reasons why, a lot of my friends joke me, but I did not play video games after a certain time because it wasn't what I wanted to be and what people wanted from me. That wasn't acceptable. That was being childish. And I, to this day, I don't know anything past Mario Brothers or Sonic the Hedgehog. I don't remember anything past that because I wasn't a part of that culture. And now that I'm seeing people have these long legacies with it and are entrenched into the culture of it, I really feel like I missed a part of my childhood because I was trying to be a professional artist or try to be, a part of this. But those things were things that were a part of our culture anyway. It's just now it's more acceptable to do
Hmm.
things. Look at how people are dressing, down to what they wear on their bodies, jewelry. Wearing stuff like that was considered, like the jewelry you have on, or the jewelry that I make. Like it was only relegated to black Afrocentric hippies. Now it's a part of culture to be Afrocentric, but in an urban chic type. Like it's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
minute and so it's crazy to me how we still in 2023 are marginalizing people for who they are, and for some reason this LGBTQ plus thing is just still, it's hard for people, and I get it, but it's not new. It's
Uh,
not something that is, and I
you
guess
got
because it's still connected to white culture as well. That's the hard part for us.
I mean, because white culture, like again, like a lot of our social, um, a lot of the things we accepted socially, the power that be had to make it socially acceptable. So at first, when just being, you go back in the day, gay bashing was a respected practice. Like dudes that attack somebody just for not them fitting a particular lifestyle, like that was like there's comedians used to joke and make laughs about them attacking people just for their lifestyle. I
Hmm.
don't know if there was a movie with Countess Devon where he played where um his nephew had got attacked and the dude got murdered, but the police chief, his own father, was not trying to defend his son because his son was gay. And then
Hmm.
right at the last minute when he tried to say, "Nah, I'm gonna free my boy," this boy killed himself. He's like, "But my father ain't trying to stand with me." But it's like, think about how crazy that is. Like when like you look at it from that perspective, like that's still your boy. That's still your son, but because he doesn't fit this box of masculinity that you were taught that a man's supposed to be, he's ostracized now. He's demonized. He doesn't have autonomy. Like and even
Hmm.
still, like as we go older, because it's not like we just the next generation said, "Oh no, this is acceptable. It's okay." No, like I ain't gonna hold you. When I grew up, it was taught that certain shit wasn't acceptable. That ain't man
Right.
shit. This thing. The third, I had to get older and have to realize how number one how toxic it was for you to treat people a certain way. I had to get older for me to realize that regardless of whether I disagree or agree with your lifestyle, that has absolutely nothing to do with your character.
But can you be, and I'm not saying what you're saying is not true, but
No.
even in that moment, I remember when it was a choice for me. So what you're speaking of, that type of masculinity, I remember it was the moment it was a choice I made. And I was very young, and I just saw myself as a certain, not even type of person, but I didn't want to discriminate against anybody. But that came because I was in schools where the population did not necessarily all look like me. So I got to see people who were different. I
Mm.
got to see people who made, people who I'd never encountered before, would probably had never encountered because if we had not gone to these schools together. And I just got to see people for who they were and all the different shades and complexions and styles and types. But I also understood when I came home, I was coming home to people in neighborhoods where that wasn't necessarily the norm. Like you didn't
Yeah.
necessarily see people or entwine with people. Now it's cool to have a white friend or Asian friend or a. It's cool now, but I remember that was not cool.
Yeah.
On both sides, not just
Right.
with white and black people, but it just wasn't cool. And now things are the trend is amazing to me, and I we have to give thanks to our 20 somethings and our teens right now because they're leading the way and saying just be you, just be you regardless. And I think the generation that I'm in, I don't know how old you are, I'm 39, and that
I'm 29.
generation, right? So that generation of the millennial, where I'm at the very tip of it, and it kind of goes. I think it's like 31, 32, or
Hmm.
30 right now. But I just know it's a difference.
Yeah.
And we all in our 30s and in our early 40s are still struggling with being who we authentically are. And I applaud people who came out the womb like that and was able to matriculate through life this way. But we have to admit that we did not create spaces that were safe for people to be who they were. That's why a lot of these, like the hip hop or anime or those cultures, are still subcultures.
I
There's still subcultures because they were not, even going to like the gay scene, it's still a subculture because people are still being bashed, killed, and, treated negatively simply for being who they naturally are.
I think
Right?
that's the biggest thing. I know for our generation growing up, and I get to speak for me and the dudes I grew up around.
How old did you say you were again?
I'm 29.
Okay, okay.
So I know for me and my homies, we grew up. The big thing was we questioned the old heads, hard
Mhm.
body, because certain things like stop snitching, G code. Because number one, a lot of them didn't
Right.
follow those codes.
A
That
lot
was
of who? Say that again.
like when I used to run around a little bit, act like a little hoodlum, and not no gangster or nothing like that. I used to be a little hoodlum. So you run around these
Mhm.
guys about street code, women and children. Oh, we gonna be real niggas and this, that, and the third. The
Mhm.
major thing that kind of created a dissonance with me and like my brothers, dudes I call my brothers. A lot of them didn't honor those codes. And then when we go back and we look at those old gangsters we emulated and honored, they were snitching. They were beating on women. They were
Mhm.
abusers. Every code that was supposedly honored, and we learned from the Italians. From the Italians we had to go to do business with to be in the street. They were snitches. They weren't honorable. They attacked women. So
Mhm.
it's just looking at from this critical lens that this perception of manhood that y'all imposed on a lot of y'all didn't even honor yourselves. So
Well,
then
that
it's
well, I'm gonna tell you a secret. That is not a new thing. That
no,
is that happens. It's just now social media, you really can't hide a lot anymore. And see, you grew up in a space where you always had social media, or
yeah,
what you were, it was always available. My generation, it wasn't. So we got to like. So I think by the time I was like 15, 16, cell phones were starting to be more accessible and affordable for the everyday person, not just the drug dealer or the super rich person. And it did something to a lot of us because some of us made a choice where we were going to stay in that closet of, and not just gay, but just in the closet, period, being secretive, or we're going to jump out there. And for me, it like I baby stepped into this new space of technology and social media because I didn't understand it. Everything was private before, and now
yeah,
that we're open, you starting to see, and that's what happens once you become an adult. You be like, these people wasn't really living, but now you're able to see it in real time. You're
mm-hmm.
able to see a court case with a gang affiliated music label that you're able to see these things. At first, it was just chit chatter. You didn't see the faces necessarily, but you're now seeing stuff that each generation, we've seen it. In my generation, white beaters didn't grow up in the last 20 years or didn't pop up.
Right,
drug dealers or people snitching and choosing to save themselves. Snitch culture has become
Right.
such a big part of hip hop in the black community that we are saving people who are killing us.
We're saving
And
money.
right, we're saving monsters, and all because of a G code that we have nothing to do with. That G code is amongst thieves and criminals. It has nothing to do with the people who live in those communities that they are monsters in.
The,
And
the,
it,
the,
go ahead.
like, stop. My fault. I ain't- Not to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I want to elaborate because, like, stop snitching because it got real popular with the Black Mafia in Philly. But I remember I was watching a documentary about it, and it never. I told my mans and said, if this is what being a street nigga is, I want no parts. Because again,
Hmm.
no women, no children. But the people y'all were killing for snitching weren't criminals. It was shop owners. It was innocent civilians, grandmas that y'all
Yeah.
were extorting and murdering. This guy came out and said, hey, Elijah Muhammad, blah, 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 made a comment on Elijah Muhammad. They loaded up a car and y'all went to this man's house and you slaughtered his family because that was G code. Women, children.
Hmm.
But again, G code,
People who had
gangster,
nothing to do with it.
nothing to do with nothing. G code. I wanted no parts of this. Like I knew, like I was never a punk. You know what I mean? If I
Hmm.
had to defend myself, I'd defend myself. But I was like, yo, if this is being gangster, I don't want to be gangster. I'll be a nerd, bro. I'll be a nerd all day and be the guy that'll stick up for women, the guy that or stick up for people getting picked on. I'll be that before I be what y'all call gangster. Because what y'all call gangsters are just bullies. They just bully people who have no affiliation to the
But
code.
again, and I'm only saying it because I'm 10 years older than you. But
Right.
that person was put above all else. One of the
Mm-hmm.
prominent, most connected to me was my uncle Larry. He's passed away since, but because he was out there selling drugs and he was a like thick, muscular, light-skinned man who was out there, and everybody was afraid of him, but everybody loved him at the same time because he did just as much good as he did bad. And I remember saying to him, like, I had an incident with him, and I'm gonna tread lightly in talking about it because there are
Of
people
course,
in
of
my
course.
family that still love him. But there was an incident with him where I watched him beat my aunt down a flight of stairs. There was something. So he's my uncle, and that was his wife, but that's my aunt. And I watched him beat her down a flight of stairs in front of myself, my mother, and my great grandmother. And I held on to that for years. And not so soon after that, he was put into jail under that three strike, that new at the time new three strike rule.
Yeah.
And I remember him being in jail, and even when my mother would take me to go see him, I didn't say much to him because in my mind that was the last representation of him that I had, and I could not shake that. And but people loves him. People love that type of person. But we would post them up, and the person who was trying to do their best and trying to fight through and be positive, we normally call them corny, or we don't look at them like we put these other
Right.
people up in reverence. But those are the same type of people, you know, why we have so many crack babies, why we have so many drug addicted children or broken families, or, you know, and I got to talk to him briefly once he had gotten out after six. Like I was a grown man by the time he got out, and I was probably like 8 or 9 when he went in. And I remember that duration. I wrote him one letter, and I was very frustrated with him because I could not get that image of him beating her down the steps out my head. And because I would hear all these funny stories, even if he passed away, I was still kind of locked in that feeling, and I could not break it. I didn't know how to shake that image of him. And
Right.
thankfully, we did get a chance to speak, and I was able to forgive him. And I didn't, so he didn't carry that with him to his grave and connect me to it. But I'm understanding the ideals that we have about what's cool and what's strong and what's powerful and who's a leader. That representation is flawed in many of us, especially us black men, because
Yeah.
we are still being put into a box of what we're supposed to be. I've watched many different podcasts about men, and the one thing that I hear is that we're providers, we're protectors. I don't hear anything about how we are. When you're pouring in two cups, you're pouring your providing factors into people. You're pouring your protective measures into people, but nobody ever talks about who's pouring into that man and how he maintains that. And it's a reality that I think um, is changing right now, because even the dynamic of men and women and men is really different from
Yeah.
when I was young. It's just different.
I think
Men are popping it like it's dropping it like it's hot just as much as the women are, or the dynamics are changed. This the image of everything. It's like everything we thought we knew. Guess what? It's was much more down in that bag.
well, I'll use I got in a debate with somebody about Michael B. Jordan had a thing with the reporter. And,
Mm-hmm.
me and my man said he actually handled it relatively cool, but like I was telling I think I did an episode on it. It's really weird that the criticism is he looks like a nice and respectable guy, but he's corny. And when you ask him
Yeah.
what makes him corny, it's because he used to walk around with his headshot in his school all the time, and we were around thugs and gangsters. Mind you, again, violent people, people who are quick to aggression, they don't have the emotional maturity to handle situations without escalating it to violence. That
Mm-hmm.
was cool. That was cool to us. No funny shit. I was, that was cool to us.
Mm-hmm.
But the guy who doesn't call women out their name, the guy who learned to respect people around him, who knew what he wanted to do from a young age, focused, driven, passionate, but he was always kind and courteous to everyone around him.
Mm-hmm.
That was corny. And now when he gets older, you have someone like Joe Budden calling him corny for doing that. But the man like Joe Budden of all people, who every interaction with women you've had resulted in allegations of violence and putting your hands on them.
Mm-hmm.
But when Hand from Wu-Tang punched you in the face, you didn't put hands on him. But when
Mm-hmm.
you go to these women you're dealing with, isn't that corny?
But see again, representation is everything. Because growing up, we would have seen that that's what men were supposed to do. That's how men handle, conflict.
Put the
That's
violence.
how we deal with life. Um, I think there's been a lot of who are you supposed to be, and like a lot of that. And men are not one, we're not a monolith, just like they say black women aren't monolith, but there's this thing in us where we are supposed to assert ourselves. Well,
Yeah.
asserting yourself now is considered a rapist now. Being and as definitions changing, as definitions has changed in terms of what certain characteristics are and what they are now,
Right.
there has been no shift in teaching young men anything different.
I think how
So,
we treat women is very important too. Like you,
mhm, yeah,
because you said assertive, and I remember when I was
mhm,
taught being assertive to a woman, you come up talk to her, might grab on her a little bit, hey shorty, how you doing? You know what I mean? Start spit some whack ass game to her. But
mhm.
then in hindsight, damn, she didn't want to get grabbed like that. Damn, nigga, get out her face, bro. Like, say how you're doing. Like,
But hindsight is always 2020. You can
yeah,
always look back and say, "Hey, you shouldn't have done that." But if every representation that we saw was that type of person, from the music that we were supposed to love to the family members that we saw to TV those are the things that shaped us.
yeah,
Then the woman who often raises us are often with men who treated them that way. So why would it be any different? Why would it be wrong? Or why would it be considered wrong, in these spaces? And now you're telling me that that behavior is wrong. Now you're going back
mm-hmm.
and judging behavior based off of how you raised me. Now, some of us did not do those things because I grew up in a house full of women and I learned how women wanted to be treated,
Yeah,
not versus how they deserve to be treated, which are can sometimes be two different things. But it, I learned how women wanted to be treated. I grew up in a house with a mother, a grandmother, a great grandmother, a sister, a cousin, all women. The men were there, but from a distance.
yeah.
And so I learned a woman's perspective. So I grew up being very respectful and often gullible towards women. Um, and
I can say that too.
right, and it just, now that as an adult, I am now looking at things differently, and I'm having a lot of issues with women because not necessarily how I think, you need to communicate to me what you feel, what you want, so I know those things. Because now I'm just walking through life and oops, I stepped on a mine and it blows up. And
Right,
I didn't know that mine was there. I didn't know I was in a field full of mines. First of all, and now that I know I am, I'm stuck. I don't like being I do not like being by myself with a woman that I'm not friends or family or a loved one of. I don't, and even with them, I'm still monitoring the situation because now I'm in a space where I've seen all these men who did wrong things, but who were raised to do those wrong things and now being ostracized for doing those wrong things. And it's just a weird space to be in when you don't have a heart to hurt anybody, but
right,
you're still being looked at. Like I've been called a misogynistic person because I use the word male, female, and male. And I use it interchangeably with woman or man. And it's just a weird space to be in because you don't know what to do. So taking it back to our topic, how important is black representation? I think it's very important. I wish I would have had more representation in my space, like a Michael B. Jordan versus uh, a 50 Cent or the people who were prominent images as I was growing up. And it's a weird space to be in because you don't
right,
know what to value and what not to value. Um,
right,
it's making me want to go through the rest of our topics, but we got to stick to this one. But representation, and it was a good opener because a lot of the issues that we're having are based on the representation that we had or lack thereof. You
that's a
know.
fact.
Hmm.
And just quick, just a note to that too. I think for me, the benefit for me for representation was going into comic books and seeing how many black people really were behind the scenes drawing comic books.
Hmm.
Um, like Dwayne McDuffie, RIP to the GOAT. He started Milestone Comics in the 90s, and his depiction of black people in comics, because a lot of comic book characters were created by white people. So, there were
Hmm.
pimps and hoes. And when Milestone came out, we were seeing multifaceted depictions of black characters didn't just speak in jive English. Like you didn't see their blackness be the sole characteristic of their character. Like they were
They just
actually,
so happen to be black. Not it wasn't painted
and
that
he
way.
never danced around race, but he never made race the selling point of any black. Like Static
Hmm.
Shock, most people don't know. Static Shock was Dwayne McDuffie. You ever see? Remember cartoon back in the day? If you don't, it was the dreadhead boy with electricity powers.
Hmm.
That's Dwayne McDuffie. That was that cartoon, and mind you, that cartoon won Emmy Awards for the writing, and people thought that was just Spring Up the Blue. Dwayne McDuffie was writing Justice League. He was directing some of the best episodes in Justice League, the whole
Hmm.
nine. And even when he wasn't writing solely black creations, every time a like he would use black characters he didn't see. Like a lot of us didn't know about Vixen, John Stewart, Green Lantern, and he didn't make their race the central part of their character. But it was dope to see these different spectrums of black characters and them be cool and them be honorable and self-righteous and they're courteous. And that for me influenced me a lot growing up.
Right.
So representation, that representation, I know for a fact, for a lot of black boys would have been super beneficial to them to see that, you can still be strong and masculine, but be respectful and kind and
Hmm.
courteous. but that representation had to be there. So I think me being into so many comic books and stuff like that, I got to read a lot of Black voices, a lot of healthy Black perspectives that that shaped me. So I think representation, Black representation in its totality, just needs more diversity for Black men specifically, because
Mm.
you can still see the strong, like, to me, Michael B. Jordan's still a strong Black man. Jonathan Majors, they're still strong Black men, but they're not the strong Black men based on the image we had as
The
kids.
stereotype.
Exactly. They're not the tough nigga who just got out of jail, slap anybody moment, because that's not strength. That's emotional weakness. But that we
Mm.
had to get older to realize that's an emotional, fragile person who has to respond in violence when they're met with adversity. It's different when defending yourself than when you have a disagreement, you have to swing on somebody. But when we were younger, that was taught as masculine. But
Mhm.
as the generations go past, we realize there's a level of vulnerability that you don't know how to deal with, so you respond with violence. You respond with being mean or being hurtful, or the moment a woman voices her concerns, it's shut up, bitch, and this, that, and the third. When that's not all men. Not all
It's
men were
not.
that. And but we weren't shown that. Like you said, like most of the rap stars we listen to, fuck these hoes, fuck these girls, get money. Like, look at Biggie, fuck bitches, get money. Hell, he's on Dead Wrong talking about abusing kids.
And those are
But
the images, and what is so I get what you're saying, but the thing that has to happen is, one, we have to acknowledge that, prime example, and I'm not throwing out these names to bash them individually, but
right,
I can't pretend like I didn't grow up with a Snoop Dogg that was walking around with women on leashes and calling them tricks and bitches. But now the my nieces and children that I'm teaching are now growing up with a Martha Stewart Snoop Dogg that is softened, that is aged, that has grown and understood some things. That's still smoking hella weed, but they get to see a more positive version of him
and everyone has
that
the right
I
to
got to
change.
see. But you can't pretend, those artists can't pretend, our community can't pretend that that was the image, the representation that we had growing up.
Yeah,
And if you didn't have any common sense or anybody that kind of deflected those images in your life, you grew up still in the men that are the ages of those same people, or the guys like my age group, are there are people who still are kind of perpetuating that lifestyle.
yeah,
But that's what they grew up it being acceptable.
that's all they had.
The girls liked it. They was dancing in the club to it. So, oh, this must be what a man is supposed to be. And then we kept getting these images of what a man is supposed to be, or what women wanted men to be, or the acceptable version of that. And now we're saying, hey, I could have just been me the whole time, and there would have been somebody out there that I'm comparable to that would have still, whether it been a friend or a romantic relationship, but I'm realizing I teach. And for me, I've had the most struggle in teaching because children look up to those images. And because I don't represent those images, I've had to use my skill and my intelligence to be able to win them over versus my sheer presence
Mm-hmm.
alone. And it's a weird space to be in, but I understand people who have been in the school system forever who just have a presence and represent a stereotype of what manhood is or what masculinity is, and they are respected far more than the person that came in without any of those attributes
Yeah,
or personality, layers. But it's a weird space to be in. It's interesting. I think that's why, listening to you speak, it's a weird space to be in because I didn't know how old you were, one, but to see that your generation has a different outlook on things that can be seen as disrespectful, but it's really telling the truth as it really is, and not with all the walls and, smoke and mirrors around it.
I tell you like this, what messed me up growing up was because the same image y'all grew up on, I grew up on. At a point, it was just we growing up, we idolized it to the point we were going out trying to do this shit, breaking in shit, robbing shit, fighting all the time, doing that.
Hmm.
But the older dudes around us who were acting like that, who we believe were like this, and I'm just saying around me personally. Then we start getting a
Hmm.
little older because mind you, I was fighting grown men when I was like 14 or 15. But then
Hmm.
as I'm getting older, I'm like, I ain't fighting no kids. I ain't beefing with no kids. I'm not I'm not out here running from fame from kids. I'm not even, like I
Hmm.
see someone my age, a young dude get loud and do that third. I'll pull him to the side, have a convo with him before I put my hands on you because you somebody kid. And that was a lot of us growing up who were putting ourselves in danger for people who respectfully didn't even live up to that image that they were telling us. And
Right.
that was the disconnect when we can look at a lot of these guys in our generation as hypocritical because we're watching people our age lose their lives trying to live up to an image that they didn't. Not only did y'all not do it, y'all are telling us to do it because
Hmm.
vicariously a lot of some of these old heads, what they do is they want to live through those fantasies. Like say they grew up on like 50 Cent. So it's like, yeah, we really out here doing that this. You're exaggerating the story because we're younger. We don't know. We're not in the street. So you're exaggerating the story to us. So we go out here head first, trying to, oh man, my man's did it like this. We're gonna do it like that. Then we get older and realize his uncle fronted him that. He ain't go out here rob and steal and do this and third. He had money already. Of course he could jump in the game and have pounds and do that third. Like we're doing petty crimes, thinking that we're just
Right.
gonna rise in the criminal like this. So when we got older, it was a disconnect. It was a
Well,
major
it
disconnect.
was it wasn't even a disconnect. It was simply this was the image that was being
Taught.
financed. It was the image that was being talked about. It was the image that had a lot of controversy around it because it still wasn't liked by everybody. The media, talk shows, certain outlets still talked against it, but that made it more intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And what is happening now, most of these people have sent their children to private schools and they live and go yachting and now we're at a space where and it's, I don't dislike any of them, but tell the complete truth. Stop
Yeah,
talking to me from the
yeah.
perspective of when you made it, and let me know that all I want to hear Jay-Z say all that was false. And I'm not saying that he didn't live up to a image of that, but I want him to say, "Hey, this is not. Let me just tell you real. Yeah, go buy up the neighborhood with your drug money. You're still promoting to people to continue because you know they still doing it, so you still promoting them doing it."
Versus telling them that the money they got to go to Rockefeller came from a record deal that they were paid out a few $1 million.
Hmm.
No, that few $1 million wasn't drug money. But again, we didn't know that. We believed it. So we
I
ran
think
head
to a
first.
certain degree, correct. We did not know that. And a lot of people have now built their life. So now you have a whole genre of hip hop that was built up on listening to Puff Daddy talk about money and being flashy, talked about, the biggies, the all these people who are considered as gods to us in terms of who were our heroes at that moment. Now you're hearing them say, hey, I don't own my name. I don't own the lyrics that I now have to shop around on tours performing because I don't own that. We were fed a lot of lies and now some of them made it through and now I'm bigger, but I don't believe like I'm not a Jay-Z fan anymore. And as talented as he is, I'm not a fan because you hurt a lot of individuals with your entertainment and in your progress, but now your child will never know a world of a Marcy project. Your child will never know that.
Like,
But
look
you're
at Young
still
Jeezy.
pushing the imagery to us.
Right. Like when Young Jizzy's like he came up, I saw he had an everyday struggle interview with Act, and he's like, "Yo, I'm relating to these young dudes who really out here in the field. Like I'm trying to show them elevation." Your music
Mhm.
promoted drug dealing, bro. It was literally trap or die. You didn't say grind or die, because I mean, grind, like hustling doesn't just attribute to selling drugs. So, like, famous Baltimore dealer Melvin Williams, before he started selling drugs, he just did the numbers. He was making
Yeah.
millions of dollars just off doing numbers.
Well, and me having a conversation with him, he only started selling drugs after being arrested and accused of something he did not do.
Yeah.
So he
So,
said, "Well, if you're gonna accuse me, let me take this street smarts that I learned and flip it." And then he had to back himself out of that because now you done did all this damn time for a grudge. You had a grudge against the city and the powers that be.
but salute to, like, see, and even with Den, these guys didn't go out here and say how awesome their lives were. It was the rappers watching these guys that went out and said, "I'm gonna be this guy or
Well, the
that guy."
TV shows like The Wire amplified Little Melvin's life or
Mm-hmm.
homicide, but it,
Like,
it's it and I it's hard for me to care the way I used to. Like even that I don't feel like all the air has been knocked out of me, but nothing is as it seems. Nothing. Nothing is as it seems. And that has damaged generations of people. And I feel like my generation is, I feel like we're stuck in a limbo because we have reverence for that, but we also see truths that were ugly on our young side. And our older side is like, but this is just the way it was. So, get up,
right.
do something with your life, get yourself together. But we pretend as if imagery, representation does not affect outcome.
Yeah.
I think you had a post, I want to say the end of last week, and I, I was listening to you, or it was again this week, and you was speaking about you had an opportunity to move out of this Baltimore community and see something different. And what happens is there are people who don't.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying either side will be not successful or successful because it's really an individual situation. But imagine those people who, as you spoke about, never got out of their 4 block radius,
Right.
never got outside of that community. The Park Heights, the Cherry Hills, and not again, because I know those people have, deep roots and they value, and it's great because now it's turning the narrative around. But we can't pretend like if there were people who never got out of those neighborhoods. Some never got out and were killed or died still in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And what effect was that to them versus being able to walk out into a street that's clean, that you see beautification happening, you see upward mobility happening, you see the possibilities of, and I'm not just saying if you move to white neighborhoods, I'm saying if you lived in a neighborhood where you saw if the street was messed up, the city came out and fixed it. And it
Yeah.
did not take a bunch of people complaining on eyewitness news. But being able to see something different than what you have seen your whole life. And not only do I have to go into my home and see that, but when I turn on the TV, when I turn on the radio, when I'm online, like every element of my life has been defending myself against this boogeyman of black, like this black cloud over us. And
Right.
it's like, how do we atone for that as a black community? One, and really because not only do we have to change how we're raising our children now, but we also have to make sure that the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s somethings are can pivot and now
Yeah.
see things differently because there are a lot of us who still have that mentality in us.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
go ahead.
it's nature by nurture. Sorry
Hmm.
again, my fault, man. Just we going back and forth. My bad. But
Nature versus nurturing.
yeah, like nature versus nurture. So like if you're seeing how you're raised matters. Like when I was a kid in Baltimore, like by the grace of God, the two, my stepdad and my mom's, they weren't
Hmm.
like endorsing any negativity. Like we still watch cartoon, but we go into the stoop, you know, the neighborhood's still the neighborhood, riding a bike in the back alleys and people slumped in boxes. We don't know what you're doing, but at
Right.
the same time, the neighborhood's the neighborhood. So when we moved to Charlotte, we were more scared of Charlotte than Baltimore because we moved to Charlotte. I'm in the suburbs. I see trees and woods everywhere, and
You
I'm like,
don't see the danger. Now it's like, what am I waiting on? Is this a new
yeah.
place? Hmm.
And I had to get older. Like I even said it. I think in that episode you're talking about, I didn't even know we lived in the hood until years later when I was
Because it
gone.
looked different. It just looked different.
And that was home to me. Like,
Hmm.
all the homies, we take our little McDonald's toys. We couldn't afford no toys like that, just Batman's. So I take a little Dragon Ball Z toys. They sold at Burger King. We all playing with them in the streets. We getting in fights
Hmm.
and stuff. We were kids. It's not till we get older. And I'm like, damn, our bath water used to turn brown. So mom
Hmm.
had to wash us in the sink. Or we had rats or cabinets fell down and knocked over. Like, we go outside, there's trash in the street. But that was home. So
Yeah.
then you get older, you're like, damn, like, the streets clean, like, you know what I mean? I
Hmm.
don't hear a bunch of bustling city streets. I'm in a big neighborhood, and these dudes want to be hood. And
But
these,
you also, I mean, that dynamic for me, I think, and I never lived in like the hood in that way, but I definitely was adjacent to it, like with uncles and family members who was
right,
in that lifestyle. And then when I would go to school, crazy like example. I remember being in middle school, and I was a part of the theater program. So whenever you did a play, we did this thing where you spent the night, the Friday after the Friday show, after the Saturday show. And I remember that Saturday, one of the moms brought me home, and she was so afraid for me to go catch the bus home because she thought I lived in the hood. And I I took the ride. I wasn't going to deny the ride, so I took the ride, and I could hear her saying, can you tell us where we're going? Like she wanted me to step by step tell her, so she didn't find herself in the middle of the hood. And I
right,
just understanding how people see us is crazy. So when they pulled up to my big barn style house that was bigger than theirs, that was in a pretty cool neighborhood, uh, it it shocked her. She
right,
wanted to, she got out and walked me to the door because she didn't know if that was really my house or I was just trying to like, pull around the corner, then I have to walk. I was like, no, this is my house. And
right,
this the perception of how other people saw me is the kind of how your experience and being in it. I had to get that vicariously because now is this how people are treating me differently because the assumption that I live in a crack house or I'm in a drug infested neighborhood or something.
right,
And just a weird feeling of just going through life always having to protect yourself or to be on edge because what somebody may think or what somebody perceives your
right.
life to be. You know, it,
The way he said that is
mhm,
crazy because this was wild. Was even when we lived in Baltimore as children, like,
mhm,
and I can say that for the most part, no parent's perfect, but we were raised in a good home.
mhm,
Like, we weren't like, I used to fight, but I was fighting before we moved to Baltimore. I was fighting in Fort Meade, Maryland. Like, that was just who I
mhm,
was. But whatchamacallit, when like, my mom had a big bookshelf, so we used to read all the time. That was a real big thing in our house, was reading. We
right.
all loved to read. And I was in the drawing den, and me and my brother will talk about stories and stuff like that, like all making up stuff. So when we go to the neighborhood, like, a lot of people, because my mother never let me go to school in Baltimore. She always took us to Arundel Mills, and we'd go to like my stepbrother's grandmother's house, and then we would go to school from hers. So we had
Mhm,
to switch to school because they find out we live in Baltimore. So when we would go to school, I ain't gonna hold you, I'm a little more aggressive than some of these kids, but they're not in my environment, and then they automatically write me off as if I'm a hoodlum because I'm
mhm.
from Baltimore. So all of GP, like, even when I moved to Charlotte, I'm like, yeah, I used to live in Baltimore. Like, oh man, Baltimore's like that. That don't automatically make me like that.
But their perception comes from a TV show. or a skewed news report. Like that's where it comes. People in the world, and I've lived in different places, and I've seen crime. I've seen it. I've been in New York. I've watched somebody in the middle of the day get their purse snatched, and the person walk off, and nobody. I've seen it, but
Right.
people still have you believe that Baltimore is the most dangerous city in America.
I swear to you, though. And I had to argue with somebody because I'm like, yo, to be honest, Baltimore has an art community that a lot of people don't talk about with some very talented people in the city. But the only thing we're gonna focus on is, yo, man, that's what the Wire was. You know, the Wire is like that, and most of the people in the Wire from New York.
Right there, and that's I'm a big person. Like no matter where I end up in life or in terms of location, I'll never be a person that um denies where I come from. I'm very protective over my city. So I remember I was first listening to one of your podcasts, and you started talking about the city, and I was like, "Oh, I'm about to tell this," but then I was like, "Just listen. This you don't have to respond to everything because that's how I am. Because we get such a based on a white person's perspective of and black actors' perspective of what we are, we do that. We come to. I've gone to other countries and people have that perspective. Like Baltimore was so, oh my goodness, like are you good? Like I walk out of my house every single day across the street to the store, come back like, and I have not been shot in my head not one time. You know, been
You know,
robbed, but that's because I was in a certain area and I shouldn't have been. But that's any city you go to.
I live in small ass Hinesville, Georgia, right now. You go to the right part of Hinesville, Georgia, you will get robbed.
Hmm.
You go anywhere where people are poor, don't have a lot,
Hmm.
and it's not just exclude. And what makes me angry about the perception, because even when I talk about Baltimore, like Baltimore can get wild. Yeah, if you
Hmm.
in certain parts, like you off
Right.
the Alameda and you don't know nobody over there.
Hmm.
Yeah, bro, you fool. We don't know you.
But the
But
ideals come from people who typically don't live here. And what you said in the very beginning, people who are dealing with self hatred, people who are
yeah,
still here, that still get online, that still talk about their city, but as soon as they get offline, they go back into the city. Like that's a self hatred, and then it's just this a perceived perception. I have a friend that lives in New Orleans. She's from New Orleans. She came up here during Katrina to go to school, and she talks about Baltimore as if she's not from New Orleans. And I said, Miss, you're from New Orleans. They call that the murder capital. Like, this is
statistically, the murder
right
capital.
statistically, like, if you add up the numbers, you are way more in danger than I am. Just on a daily basis.
And I live in the South, bro. Like, and it's wild because down here, if I say I'm from Baltimore, I've been, oh my gosh, it's wild. But
Hmm.
these people in the South, number one, you can have a gun openly. You get caught with a gun up north, you going to jail,
Right.
flat out. Out here,
Mhm.
everyone got guns. Everyone has guns when you in the South. But media doesn't portray every place the same. They don't say, oh, you're just in the hood. You know what I mean? The hood gets like that. No, this particular city has a particular connotation
And it's
because of,
typically a city that is considered predominantly black.
and
The
Baltimore is 90%
Baltimore's, the
black.
Atlantas,
Mm-hmm.
the New Orleans, the Miamis, like you get that Compton,
Stigma.
you get that stigma on you because people have associated black culture with crime, with drugs, with undesirable behavior. And it's a weird space to exist in because you're constantly having to defend who you are.
Yeah,
Because of those things, there was a big part of my life, even going into my adult life, where I felt like I was shrinking myself. And I'm not 6 foot anything. And I
right.
felt that I still had to shrink myself into a more attainable self. Like for people to take me as just a kind hearted person. I found myself when I was younger being in arguments with white people having to defend my nature.
Yeah,
And it affected me because now I don't give a fuck. what somebody like that says. Like it doesn't even compute to me in today's world. But I still have to watch it because I'm doing the exact opposite on the opposite side of the spectrum. I'm overcompensating for my lack of concern because I've experienced these things. And it's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I don't agree with once we get a little bit more change, we then send our children off to these predominantly white schools or try to live in predominantly white areas. I don't agree with it because, especially on the school side, you are sending your child into a space where they're not only considered a minority now, they're considered less than. My one day of Black history in, I went to Archbishop Curley. My one day of Black history, that whole time I was there, was a white 20-something year old man telling me that slavery was not as bad as we have made it out to be. And me and one other, never forget Kojo. Me and Kojo sitting in this classroom and hearing young white boys around us laughing, snickering, and now understanding that those same 39-year-olds are now in a world feeling like Black people are exaggerating what slavery was. So when I see people in my age group that may be white or other, I now understand why they feel that way because they were taught that same way I was taught it. And had I not known better or gotten a blacker education prior to that and after that, I would not have known it. So much so that I went to the blackest school in Baltimore City, Coppin State University, because I felt like I had to declutter all of the
Yeah.
white education that I got. But
No,
how many
I
other
definitely
people
feel
are
that.
in that predicament that can make that choice for themselves or just go along? Like Kojo, definitely, his name was Kojo. So I know there was a sense of culture in his home. But again, Kojo was cool. He was like, man, I'm not. I mean, they can say what they want to say. And I could tell how it affected him in the moment. He was very embarrassed. When we walked home from school that day, Kojo was very embarrassed.
Right.
When Kojo went home and told his mother immediately took him out of the school. So that meant it was a problem. But Kojo was not affected by it because he just accepted what was said. And for me, I just I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't accept that being the truth. But if you understand it and you've gotten that type of education, you understand why there are white, young, 30-some-year-old Republicans that feel like we don't need reparations to stop with this. If you can stop talking about it, then. But
No.
I've never heard Jewish people not talk about the Holocaust or
Holocaust.
xenophobia.
But
Never, not once.
you got people trying to mitigate our history and try to tell us not about it. And that's why representation to me is
Hmm.
paramount because
Yeah.
the past influences the present, and
Hmm.
the past influencing the present shapes the future. So if we're not teaching an accurate whole perspective of the past, of course they're not going to teach themselves the whole perspective of our history, because then
Right.
that's a lot of violence, torture, oppression that you got to bring to the forefront. A lot of laws, inventions, a lot of things that we cultivated, musical genres. Start realizing we had a bit of a lot of everybody's history in this country specifically. But
Hmm.
then you downplay slavery, and a lot of people don't realize before the transatlantic slave trade, it was the sub-Saharan slave trade that was almost 1,000 years.
Hmm.
So but of course, you're not going to teach that. You're going to teach, oh, it wasn't that bad. There wasn't that, like, but they used to
He
feed
he
our.
literally said, and I will never forget this. Slavery was not as bad as people say it was. He likened us to farm equipment. He said, "Why would that's just like you going out to your farm and beating on your plow? Why would you beat your plow?" And when I was that age, I still didn't understand the I didn't the severity of what he said. It still, as angry as I was then, imagine how angry I am now, knowing
No,
exactly what he was saying in that moment. It was almost like I was in the middle of a Ku Klux Klan meeting, like a intro Ku Klux Klan meeting where they're inciting them with false information and giving them false perceptions of what black people were. And I got to sit in the back of a classroom and
I,
hear it.
I ain't gonna lie. I've heard some like when I went to college. I went to college here in Georgia,
Hmm.
and I think randomly I was talking about rap, and I love hip hop when I got into it and stuff. So we was talking about rap, and I guess this white dude heard me. And he wanted to talk to me about it, and dude was like always trying to talk to me, but he was flicker
Hmm.
racist. And I think it was this one time he said something that kind of pissed me off because he's like, "Yo, I was wondering how is rap really a black thing, but it was invented by the Beastie Boys," and like I got so angry because I'm like, but it's blatantly false. Like they went on tour
Blatantly.
with Run DMC, Sugar Hill Gang. What are you talking? But I have to
Even before
remember,
that, it still was started like really like the mid going into the late 70s, even before them.
yeah, like like rap, like bro, they before the Beastie Boys came in, it was like almost a 10, 12 year period before these boys even started rapping, let alone when they blew up.
Were they even born? Were they, old enough to even know the
Right,
origin?
right, because they blew what the Beastie Boys came out in the 80s.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
so I'm like, that's a whole decade of artists before
Yep.
you saw the Beastie
Yep.
Boys. I was like, how did this? How did you? But then
But
it
that,
makes sense.
but we allow them that. We allow them that. When we wear ACDC shirts and when we do stuff like that, that's perpetuating and making claim that, rock history and country history is pristine. It's just pristine. They've only allowed a few of us to integrate that, and even when that happens, they were just a phenomenon. Like it was, you could not deny them. Um,
But
but
they will
again, they
go,
just
they will
go
have a
ahead.
heart attack if you tell them that punk rock was started by three black dudes in Detroit.
Yeah,
They'll
the
have a
same way
heart
with
attack.
country. The same as country's origin was in blues and jazz. They hate to hear that, because that goes against their narrative of their creationism. Like
Mm,
you see how hard they go for, when they have their websites, they make sure it's a perfect history of it. You are familiar with the School of Arts here in Baltimore
hmm
that Tupac and Jada Pinkett went to. That school was started by a black woman and a black team of people. You would never know that, because if you go to their website, you have to dig so deep into their website at one time, because now they have their first black, uh, uh, I guess, principal of the school, a friend of mine, Ross Carlson, who exposes history to me. And it was crazy because you would not have thought over the years how white that school has been. They just got into a lot of trouble because they're black. They have a black student union there now, and they have been speaking out. And people are so up arms that this is happening at this white institution that was started by a black woman. And you don't even know, we don't know that history. And the
I
ones
didn't
of
even
us
know that.
that
That's
do just
crazy
feel
though.
like it's not important, it's not significant enough to tell it.
E- Even though that very much matters.
It very much so matters, because I think more black parents would have trusted sending their children to that school. And it would have been more of us there. And I auditioned to be in that school, just like a lot of my other creative friends auditioned at times. And it would have been seen as more of ours, instead of just posting up the Tupac and Jada pictures, which are that's representation. That's why a lot of people went to that school, because Tupac went to that school. But at
Right,
the same time, and Jada Pinkett, not discrediting her at all, but
right.
it it fails every single time when representation isn't put in the forefront or made prominent, or our history isn't being told by us. We, as a teacher, I'm gonna tell you, do not depend on the school system to teach your children about themselves, unless they have a person like me who gets in trouble every year because I plaster black faces, depending on what class I'm teaching. I plaster those black faces that's in that area in that classroom. Gotten in
Right.
trouble several times because of that, and it's just not. We don't do enough to push our own. So
I
we
agree
got
with that.
in my story of that one day of Black History and at Archbishop Curley High School, where people are still sending their children, and they just in the last couple of years got their first black, you know, teacher. But we have to stop. And if you're going to send, you have to be as involved as any other parent at that school, if not more, because you need to know what your children are learning and what they're gathering because it representation matters. It
Especially
matters.
in the arts, it matters more than anything.
Hmm.
Um, I could say that, with just taking it to comic book, for example. I got pushed back just for the name of my comic book company because I called it Black God Comics. And the
And people don't
reason,
see the significance of why you have to put that title on it.
like, and I put the, like, people don't understand, like, I had to put the title because most of the time we try to hide, oh man, this isn't a black comic book company, this, that. And I was like, nah, if I'm writing about like black gods and I'm making up my own
Hmm.
mythology, this is Black God Comics. Like, these are the deities and characters I'm creating for me. I wanted characters that look like me. I wanted characters that,
So
I
are
used
you?
to.
So does the pushback, does it happen more from people outside of our culture, or is it kind of even?
It's actually even. I had a family member hit me one time by changing the name, and they're like, you can appeal to a wider audience and stuff. And what's wild when he said that was, I get business from everybody. I've done business with everybody, from white to black, no different. Because when they're into the art, they're not really, they
The
really don't
politics
care.
of it all. Hmm.
They don't give a damn. And then the major thing is, my stories aren't political. That I never
Hmm.
wanted that to be the focus. I wanted just to have us and the cool stories I used to read as a kid, just for people that look like me. The epic battles, the cool character development. And I had one guy, a white guy, one day. I posted a just a picture promoting it,
Hmm.
and he commented like, "Oh man, what type of gods are going to be in a book?" And I'm like, "Bro, I'm not actually putting black deities that are known in the story. It's the name of the company. The books are not called Black God Comics. One's a crime story. One's like Dragon Ball Z and a war story. Like, I just wanted to do genres that I don't see a lot of us in, and I don't see us represented in multifaceted ways. Or
But you saying that is the reason why I'm the space that I'm in right now. When I hear Jewish people speak out, when I hear Asian people, I turn a deaf ear to it because we've always had to defend the significance and importance of our history beyond slavery. We've had to
yes,
always defend that. And Lonnie says the district is partially to blame. The district, the parents, the teachers, the students, everybody has a blame in it. And I definitely agree with you. But it
yeah,
definitely is I turn that deaf ear because we've always had to defend why something is important.
right.
And then people don't embrace. Have you been to the new Smithsonian African American Museum of Art in DC?
I seen a walkthrough. I never went.
So if you go, one, that museum in the first 3 or 4 years of its existence did better than any of the Smithsonian museums that line the mall or are around DC. And when you go, of course, it was a lot of us that went that were scholars or Afrocentric or whatever the gambit may be. But the most people that I saw there were from other countries, other cultures. And I had to go back so many times to see actually see the exhibits in the museum because I found myself people watching it. Because I wanted to hear how other people saw this, and it in the specific moment of that museum, it starts with slavery and it ends in present day, and I was just enthralled in how people were seeing the history. What I need to now happen is for somebody to create that same caliber museum going in the opposite direction, because
Yes, show
that's
our
what is
history
going to
before
matter to
slavery.
us. Right, because we the way that that museum started was slavery was in the history, and you go through this spiral, and you go all the way upstairs, and it's more modern day entertainment. Whereas though in the bottom is the stuff that the Emmett Till exhibition, actual slave huts, and it's interesting because people think that that's all that Black history is. So I appreciate them capitalizing our history in America, but I now need to see it go in the opposite direction, because
Yeah,
people still to this day don't see us beyond being in
place.
shackles.
They-
Right,
Like
slavery.
they don't show any of our West African history. They don't show any African history of Mali, of Kemet. We don't.
Right.
That's what I've always pissed me off more than anything when we talk about Black history, because it's thousands of
Mm-hmm.
years of Timbuktu was the first university ever in the
Mm-hmm.
world in Africa. Astrology, brain surgery, like these things were cultivated thousands of years ago in the motherland. Or you go to the history of Greece with the Mesopotamians, how we were there, how Moors went to Spain and cultivated culture and architecture. A lot of
But
people don't
even
know.
if so I went to school to be an artist. So I learned art history. So it's the same thing as it's from the perspective of artists. We learned
Yeah,
that, like, even the idea of what theater is came out of ritual. So Romans and Greeks, as you just said, came to Africa before we even went there, came to and stole bits and pieces and made it their own. So now, even when you think about theater history, you learn it from the perspectives of the Greeks and Romans. You don't learn it from the perspective of Africans and the significance of that, unless it's from Egypt. That's the only way
right.
they'll give any type of credit, where credit is due. But Lonnie says, why do we need to dummy down our brands? And the answer to that is there's no reason for us to do it other than us wanting to succeed, us
Mm-hmm.
needing to succeed, us feeling that the only way we will succeed. Um, uh, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit in some of our other subjects, but the idea that our representation in, say, Hollywood or wealth, um, the idea is that nobody can be that talented in terms of Black people. You
Mm-hmm.
had to have sold yourself to the Illuminati. So we get into this
Oh, I
area
hate
of
that.
our representation is flawed, because they had to have sold a piece of themselves in order to be nobody.
Oh,
I
they
mean,
have to be
Whitney
Mason.
Houston's voice was because she sold herself. Nobody can have a voice that great. Beyonce can't be so flawless. Michael Jackson couldn't just be that monstrous of a person that is supernatural international. But again, we're being spoon fed not only by the others, but by ourselves, that we could never be that great. We could never. So the idea of us dumbing down our brand is because we don't want to put Black owned or Black operated or Black da 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 da, because it's a thing of, will white people accept this? Will white people support us? Will white people buy this? Will white people come into the door? In many cases, no. But in many cases, yes. As you said, diehard comic book people love the art of comic book making,
I,
and will look at you as more of a niche for them. Go ahead.
I'll tell you an example from comics. This when they put out characters like, oh, we're gonna make a Black Superman. I was going through the comments and it was a white guy. I thought he was about to say something ignorant as hell, but he says the same argument I say all the time. Why don't we just use the Black characters we already have, like Icon, Vixen? Like we have fire Black characters
We
that
do.
exist that we'll never see, because to a lot of Black people, like, remember they were saying Michael B. Jordan gonna play Superman.
Hmm.
A lot of us, me personally, it made me angry because number one, we never got a regular good Superman movie anyway. But then two, most importantly, Why don't we just like there's Bloodwind, Blue Marvel, Val Zod Superman. Y'all just wanted to make
Mm-hmm.
him Clark Kent black, but why don't we use a black character that is intrinsically ours and not just a white version of another character because we feel that they're not going to succeed on their own. But then we look at a Black Panther, who, mind you, is
Mm-hmm.
not even black. He's not black created. It's two Jewish guys made a Black Panther, but it made $1 billion. So
So
obviously,
let me tell you. So first of all, I don't want any hate because I know you are connected with that world, and that world is going to see you on this. So I don't know anything about anime, Marvel. I'm just telling you that now. I love Batman. I love um, uh, Superman. That's all I know, and I don't even know if they're Marvel or I don't know. But
right, right,
what I'll definitely say to your point, it I watch when I see people in the comments say stuff like that because like you said, Black Panther is still white made. It's still a white perspective of what black culture is. And was it stolen and from some of those black writers who are writing? Yeah, it was. But I also understand and why I wasn't so ready. And outside of me being an actor, I'm gonna go support other black faces. But again, if we would have did this independently, and we have some type of spoof type of what that would be considered spoof, black superhero movies or just other black superhero movies that did not get nearly as much attention from us. Those
right.
seats were filled by us. That billion plus that was made from that was from us. Now, other
That
people
was strictly
came.
us.
I'm sure those Jewish creators, their family and friends came, but the rest of them, the majority of them were us. So, us being able to put that energy into our own work and take what we do seriously, and not just because it has a white stamp of approval on it.
And that's the big thing with me when I said, yo, I want to make my own books
Hmm.
because, you know, I we need more because a lot of people think it's just seeing black faces, but it's about black writers, black artists, black
Hmm.
IPs,
Black
creative
directors,
black
black producers.
right, like
Hmm.
more. And it's not that they're not out there, but the ones that are successful don't put the same energy into black productions that they do into those bigger white productions because they feel that that's a more guaranteed success. Which a part of it, you can't be mad at it because there's some truth to it. Because like you said, Meteor Man came out. We
Hmm.
ain't get $1 billion for Meteor Man. Blank
Nope.
Man with a black
Yeah.
on. It's a comedy with that the Wayne's brothers. They
Hmm.
didn't get that. They didn't get $1 billion in movie theater. Now maybe they made a more serious movie, maybe, but who knows? But Black
But it's
Panther
always
got
that
billions.
excuse though. It's always, and I get it, because sometimes you see the quality is this, but the quality is attached to the investment that was attached to it. So they only could really bring. Nobody has a magic wand that's going to just magically make a movie, but at the
Right,
same time, it's just frustrating to me that
right.
we build our resume off of white entities and we only take because I have friends now that are artists that will only work with white producers or white artists because they think and what is truth, but it's still a thought behind that. Now turned into a belief that only way I'm gonna make it is if I'm gonna go through this white door. If my management is white, if my producers are white, and I'm not a person that downs people for that because I've been paid much better from the white led things that I've done in the arts than the black things that I've led. But the quality of my work, the connection that I have is definitely flipped and reversed. And it is I don't know what it's going to take. Is it, the fact that Tyler Perry now has this studio that I think this other gentleman is about to, what's his name? I can't remember his name. He's about to build one in New Orleans. You know, Robert Townsend has
Anthony Mackie.
Anthony Mackie. He wants to build the same type of space in New Orleans, which is going to be magical because so much of their space has been left for dead. So the opportunity of building out on some of those spaces and building will probably change the economic value beyond just a tourist drinking, get slutty drunk type of, environment. But again, we have to see the value in who we are. If all of us got together and invested, simply the fact of you agreeing to come and partner with me doing that gives me hope that there are other people out there that want to build together. The fact that
Right.
now every other event that you hear is called the Black Wall Street, it's simmering, but we have to take a chance on each other and just do what you do great, do what I and just bring that. But again,
Right.
I gotta make sure mine is good. I gotta make sure. But how are you gonna really be good if everybody around you is destitute? Like how
And
how good are you really doing?
people don't know you can do both. Like even with me doing comic books, the crazy thing is 99% of my client base is black. Like
Hmm.
it's rare I've had white people buy pictures for me, no doubt, but 99 is black. Like the stereotype of, oh, you know, niggas don't be trying to pay no money. I can honestly say, man, my support group of black customers, they don't mind paying that bread. And I don't charge people crazy either, because to me, it was more so of building amongst the other creators around me who
Right.
can't go to that professional artist who's gonna charge you $300 a page or a buck 50 a page. And I'm like, yo, you know, I ain't cheap and I ain't expensive, bro. But the bigger thing is, yo, your idea is fire to me. Like I know a lot of brothers when I was growing up who would think of a fire ass story, but they don't have an artist. Well, bro, I'll work
Hmm.
with you. I'll work with you, no issue. Oh man, I don't got it all. Hey man, just drop a little bit what you can, bro. Because it's not about getting the biggest
But
buck either.
that's you looking beyond the value because you obviously you see the value, but you are tapping into passion at that moment. And
Yeah,
passion can take you much further than a lump sum of money upfront. And the many of us miss out because we're looking for that bag with each other right now. Oh, you can't pay? Well, I'm sorry, bro. Like, but now, okay, so if you don't have all the money to get this done, so let's split the proceeds or let's split the end result of it. We have to figure out a way how to move back to where we were when we needed each other without moving us backwards to when we
exactly.
needed each other. Like we've definitely had to move forward with it, but we have to figure out, you know, we cannot do business like other cultures. It's not in us. And it
No.
turns us into creatures of this marsh. Oh, it's so ugly on us when we operate like other cultures operate. And
When
not
we
just
always operated on a barter system of the exchange of value. That's how
well,
we
just the
survive.
shared experience of it. Like
Right.
if this is successful, we both about to be. But a lot of us will use this moment. So now you like, nah, because I'd experienced that before, and this nigga ran off before all the money. So we have to have
Right.
integrity in what we're doing again.
Yeah.
And I recall people speaking about that, even though that's not the. I grew up in the '80s and the '90s, so I didn't know. I didn't really know that. I knew that existed because there were still remnants of that and there's still people who know that era. But again, in your generation and younger, it's like y'all don't know that at all. But you all are bringing it back in a way, but it's still right clicky. You're bringing back the click again. So now let's let this click win. But we have to now move beyond that click because the ecosystem can't really exist here. Because where are you
Nice.
then
And,
spending the money that you make in this tight ecosystem? Where are you putting
right.
that money? Are you going to then go back over and skip over the black people and go get your supplies and your printing? And I love the pandemic because it forced me to know who was selling who was the black toilet paper, companies or the black art supply companies, or I had to do my research. And it's not just for always falling out lap because these people can't afford the marketing that we've afforded for others. So, um,
Nah,
but
that's a
but
fact.
yeah, it's been. I don't know why this conversation, because even when I wrote down this topic, like it did something to me, because going back to the responses I got from it, it really was a little bit all over the place, and it allowed me to see how people saw themselves, and how people took this issue. Some of the comments were, uh, I think you said, so certain images aren't demonized.
Hmm.
Uh, Sean said empowerment, and the question was, how important is uh, representation? I didn't put black on this post because I wanted to see how people answered it. Sean said empowerment, role models, and demystifying, destroying stereotypes. And I think that's what we were kind of talking about in the beginning.
Yeah,
Uh, Nikki says it's really all you have for people to decide whether or not to deal with you. God representation of yourself, a good representation of yourself could be the big difference of change opportunities in life. Demond, who commented earlier, says representation is necessary because it allows people to be seen and heard in a way that is meaningful and impactful. Representation helps to create a more equitable and inclusive society by giving people a voice and a platform to share their stories, experiences. Representation also helps to challenge stereotypes, as we said earlier, and create a more accurate and diverse representation of different groups in society. And if you go, I'm going to tag this thread to this video so people can see it. But
right.
just all the responses, and it wasn't all just black voices that spoke in this group. Max being one
That's
of them.
fire.
But I think these conversations need to just be had in ways that are not. I think there's a way that we can do it where it's not offensive, but we have to place our trigger to the side, because a lot of this has to be talked about. We gotta deal with it. We gotta get
Yeah,
through it. And listening to your thread, I have to give you that credit. It made this mini series that I wanted us to do together possible, because at sometimes you just be like, man, I don't care. Because it's not gonna change, or people not gonna change,
right.
or people gonna think what they want to think regardless. But until you're presented with the information, I can't question something if I don't first know something. And the
Yeah,
reverse is possible. I can't expect for people to want to sit down and get through the issues if I don't first present something as an option or just spark a conversation. And, you know, who knows what type of change can be made. And maybe the representation that we have will be, the quality of them will be better and made better. And we can't keep letting these outlets tell us what's great black content, or
exactly.
entertainment or education or so on and so forth. So, for you, give me your spew of this, or how you feel, or what you want to
Um,
leave people with.
I mean, I'll say this: when it comes to representation, I agree. I feel we have to have the conversation because it starts with the conversation. It starts, like
Hmm.
I always said, the war nowadays for our people is mental, and we
Yeah,
have to have those conversations. We have to address.
psychological.
Yeah, it's a psychological war, and after slavery and after everything we went through, there was no therapy for us to deal with those traumas, to deal with those pains, and to deal with those negative connotations taught. So we've just been surviving generation to generation, burying that trauma under, we're gonna be all right, we're gonna be okay when we're not okay. There are a lot of things that we internalize in the community that we as a community have to address, and we can't wait for another community to have these
Pause
conversations.
right there. Pause right there. Don't lose your thought. But when we go to get the help, and I'm speaking as a black man,
Right.
how do we get the help that's needed? Not not to make us better for other people, but to make us individually better. Like, that's even representation. Finding somebody who
Right.
not just thinks like you, but understands your journey. So some white, Middle Eastern, or whatever person cannot give me that. They just can't.
Um, I mean, is it easy? Heavens no. I mean, just to be honest, most black men did not have a healthy outlet to sit down until recent years, to be honest. Like you had a couple guys like, Dr. Ben or people who would really be scholars and educators back in the day, or the Khalid Muhammad's who would do this, but they still for the most part still believed in an archetypical version of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So when nowadays, like with this conversation here, maybe somebody growing up wondering if they are matching masculinity, this may be what they needed to hear two people discuss that your manhood is defined by your own personal experience. Your manhood is your definition of what black manhood is. No one has a right to tell you how to be a black man. No one has the right to tell you that, but there has to be a healthy space for us to be able to vent our frustrations, our angers, and these conversations do that. I think this has always been the answer of the podcasting space for black people can be good and bad. So when you have a lot of these podcasts, like, I personally hate some of these podcasts that are like misogynistic. And I mean real misogynistic. Like they hate women having opinions, they disrespect, they don't like men a certain way. We don't
But that
allow a
comes
healthy.
from somewhere, and I understand where you're coming from because I cringe when I can't even sometimes get through the whole thing because I'm, the Kevin Samuels of them all. I can't. But that mentality
It comes from
comes
someone.
from within.
Yeah,
It comes from within our culture, and we can't even really say to a certain degree that it's the man anymore. That term has been dissipated because we can't keep blaming other people for how we carry on the destruction.
it's us. Like it's we perpetuate it. Like
Hmm.
it's really the biggest culprit. I've always said was if we fought against those certain perceptions in our community, it'd be one thing, but we perpetuate them too. So
Right.
even if the higher power perpetuates these things, we perpetuate them. We perpetuate them by how we raise our kids. We raise our kids not to be a certain way. Hey man, that
Hmm.
ain't man shit. Put that shit down. Turn that shit off. What are you doing? Like, me and my
Mm.
grandfather never had a good relationship because I was into comics and cartoons and he was into sports. So when I wasn't doing sports, it was looked at as like, the fuck? Like, you don't play. Now, mind you, I used to box, but in the neighborhoods, but I didn't do baseball, basketball, football. I didn't watch sports. Man, I watch cartoons to this day, bro. Like, that's what I'm
Hmm.
into. Like, I can't help that. But to a lot of
Right.
dudes, it's like, what? That's not. And so when I had kids and I was raising my boys, and the big thing I told them was, they're into anime and they're into comic books. And I'm not telling them there's an age to when they can do that. If you like that till you're 13 and you're 15, or you like
Hmm.
video games, and I mean, do it, boy. If that gives you happiness and then you love it and it's entertaining, that doesn't make you less of a
But you're
man.
also giving them representation of what that love could turn into. You can't just push me out on a baseball field or a football field, and I don't see you doing it. All I
I'm
see you down there watching other people doing it. That's not helping me.
right.
It's not because I don't see a possibility in other than being a fan.
And but the thing was is as the biggest thing I always said was a lot of times we forced our young boys into certain roles because a lot of black men were vicariously living through their sons
Yep.
to be idealized versions of themselves when your son owes you nothing but to be your son. He doesn't have to be your mirror image. He's not here to live on with your legacy. You may be a boxer, but he may grow up and want to do ballerina. You don't get to tell him that's not what he wants to do.
But
Maybe in his
but
heart and soul, he wants to
right.
do the Nutcracker.
But
I
the
mean,
thing is, and that's why I said we can't just focus on how we are raising our children in terms of turning this around. You have to go back to those 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 year olds and adjust their
the
eyesight and their point
understanding
of view as well because they're living through their sons because nobody made a way for them.
they couldn't live.
Remember back, well, for me, being a part of sports used to cost a lot of money. I'm sure it still does, but you
Yeah,
used to have to pay a lot more money to be a part of stuff. So you had to pick and choose, like, well, this kid don't really look athletic, so I'm gonna put that into this kid, but this. and our parents are now, we're in a space right now where our parents can compete with us. They can compete in a different way because they have resources available to them that they didn't have. So I always see both sides of the spectrum
No,
because you know,
I
you
understand.
can't blame people for wanting their children to be this because sometimes it's just for image, but sometimes it's because, hey, I didn't have this. I didn't have somebody to put, so I'm pushing you. I'm putting you in this predicament, but we have to all understand how harmful that is and why that is happening in that way.
I'll never blame no one for doing that. In
Hmm.
terms of giving them the opportunity, but
Right,
that's the key word for me. Give them the opportunity.
right.
Give them the
Expose them to it.
choice.
It's more. I think positive to say expose them to
Yeah, give them the
it.
choice. Like my son, for example. I was showing him boxing, but you know what? He was growing up. He wasn't into boxing, and I had to stop myself and be like, I'm not trying to force you to do nothing. He'd be like, man, you don't want to train, man. I ain't training you. But then, I had to sit down with him, like, if you don't really want to do that, that's perfectly fine. When you know what you want to do, you let me know, and we're gonna push for it all out. He
Hmm.
wanted to play basketball. I said, do you want to play for real? He tried a little bit. I don't really want to. But when he finally found what he was into,
Hmm.
it I felt better. I felt like I actually gave him autonomy. And a lot of us didn't have that as kids, a
Right.
real choice. Like,
Yeah.
like, hey dad, I want to try this. I'm like, okay, well, let's try it. You try it, you don't like it, we get mad, oh, you're giving up. But maybe he don't want to do this. Maybe he kids want to try everything. He didn't want to
And
do it.
sometimes, and the problem with representation, meaning even if your parents aren't together, that there's still a representation of that experience. Because often, I know for me, my dad died when I was younger. So my stepfather, I was not into sports. He was one of the ones that would listen to baseball on the radio. And I was like, I'm not sitting here listening to this shit. This is crazy. We
Right.
have TVs for this type of stuff now. I'm not doing this. But it's still a part of me still wanted to do something that he liked. I learned that he was a singer at his funeral. And I was like, that was a missed opportunity. And he didn't know how to be my dad, and I didn't know how to be his son. And that's just how things were. All his children were grown by the time he married my mother. And it was a weird space. And I didn't have that relationship with my dad because he died when I was too young. But understanding even that is representation. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need your and we don't realize children are just trying to be accepted. That's the whole. Sometimes that what happens with children, we just want to be accepted, and we sometimes do things that we see our uncles doing. I remember the Gumby. I had the high top fade because my uncle Man
Right.
had the high top fade. I liked music because all my uncles loved music. I was trying to attach myself to them, and it just didn't. They didn't pick up on that. They didn't see, oh, he watching me. They didn't
Right.
see that. You know, my aunts didn't see it. I gravitated towards things that the people who were paying attention to me, like my grandmother, and I started doing things that they were doing. So I became a maker because my grandmother, my mother, they were all makers. So I gravitated towards the things that they liked seeing me do or they like doing, so they would participate with me, or because that's really what it is. And we sometimes, even with adults, we are doing things for acceptance, if we don't
Right.
want to admit it or not. But even our bravado, like the way we carry ourselves, is dictated by the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
What would my friends say if they thought I thought, so I won't do this? Versus this something that I really enjoy doing. Maybe I need to find new people to be around. Maybe that. Maybe, but giving our young people and our older people that space to be able to be themselves, regardless of
Yeah.
how we see it or how it makes me feel uncomfortable. Because we can't keep living for others.
Other people. Yeah. We got to
We're
be able to
gonna
be
be
ourselves.
right. You can run in place and not go anywhere. And that's why I feel like culturally we are right now. We're doing so much, but we're on a treadmill. We're not even on the pavement moving forward. We're just in this rat race on this hamster wheel, just trying to obtain and not. We got stuff now, but where we going with it? So,
I agree. I do agree on that one. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Is we're on the treadmill. We're not. We didn't jump off the treadmill yet and say let's really step forward as a
mhm,
unified unit and say, regardless of differences, we have to be able to be uh uh we have to be a unified unit in understanding in that
mhm,
one. For
yeah, yeah,
adults especially, like it starts with adults. It does, we can raise kids all day, but they're the byproduct of adults. So adults
mhm,
have to be able to fully be themselves. And once they come out and be themselves in anything, whether you're a nerd, whether you decided to say, hey, I'm a carpenter or anything, doesn't matter. You have to allow them to do that. We have to embrace people's differences in our community, and we have to embrace different images of black men in our community. And
mhm,
not every black man's the same. And if they're not the same, they shouldn't be ostracized for being different in ours.
yeah,
And until we, as adults, even me, I had to check myself sometimes. But man, I ain't no man shit. Then I'm like, let me chill. Because every man is different. Every man is raised different. Their circumstances and life situations can be different. And we have
mhm,
to be understanding and we have to still respect people for them still growing due to their circumstances.
yeah,
So,
and not expecting for everybody to fit into. And I said I wasn't going. I'm not going to use any of those trigger words that's gotten so popular. But we have to put our triggers to the side and understand that this is damage not only us but the people who we don't even see watching us, the younger people, and it's forced us to grow apart culturally versus
yeah.
growing tighter together, because I don't want to be around people no more that feel like that. That whole thing of no bad vibes, it's unhealthy to say that, because your loved ones are going through things around you, and that's why you are a loved one, because you are a support system. But I understand the idea of, man, look, I'm trying to get me together. I can't deal with nothing else negative. And you begin to distance yourself from individuals like valuable people, like parents and siblings and children, because they just are choosing not to get it together the way you are. So we
And
got to get
they may
ourselves to
never
a
get
place
it
of the
together.
good. Go ahead.
But we still, like you said, they may not ever get it together, but you
That's
still got to be
scary.
there. Like,
Yeah,
to me,
yeah.
I'd rather still be there to say that I'm here whenever you're ready to make that walk. I'm not abandoning you. I may have to step back a little bit because you're doing too much, but I'm always here.
So
Like you can always
communicate,
like
communication.
most of my brothers, I disagree with them all the time on certain things. Some I agree with, I do, but the common denominator is it's still my brother. Like I still call you family. Like even if we're not blood, I still call you family. You still reach to me if you need me. If something's going wrong, I'll still hear you out. Whether I agree or disagree, I'm not here to judge you. And a lot of black men need that more than anything. Even if someone doesn't agree with you, there's a lot of people I disagree with. But if they come to me in confidence, they know I'm not going to judge them on anything. You can come to
Mm,
me and say, "Yo, this frustrated me, Al," or "This girl did this, and I'm tripping." That and the third. Now I may tell you, "Hey, my man, you might be out of line," but at the same
mm,
time, that's me giving my word when you're asking. Some people just want to vent. They
yeah.
just want someone who can hear them without judgment. And I had to learn that too. Some people don't want to hear your advice. That's not what they called you for. They called you because they want someone to listen to them without judgment.
And you have to be okay with that. Sometimes just listening to somebody, you know, is more value. And I'm starting to learn that in some of there's this weird thing that's happening. Like I'm finding myself reaching out to more guys, trying to build stronger bonds with this guys. I've done that with women, but the place where we're at right now, I just think we need to go to our corners and get ourselves together as men and women and
Mm-hmm.
culturally. But it's a weird space to be in, because now even when you're finding ways to work together, there has to be an element of friendship or um, community there, because sometimes people are going through things that makes it hard for them to be good business people. And you got
Yeah,
to be able to, in that moment, be like, "Hey, brother, you good? Because this not cool." And be able to listen and give good advice. Because sometimes that's the, not even sometimes, that's the only way we're going to move out of this space that we're in as Black people. If we not only just tell people the truth, because now you trying to be, get your shit together, my brother. No, because you're not even listening to what the problem is, because it could be something
right,
that you've gone through or something you've experienced, and in most cases, something you're going through right now as well. And some people not willing to admit that they want to make sure everything looks good from the outside looking in. And it's not, because now we have a lot of people falling apart because they're tired of carrying this facade around with them that's
right.
getting heavier. Every time they turn a corner, they add another brick to it. But uh, I've really valued this conversation because it's something that's needed. Next week, or the next conversation will be, no one wants to be a role model anymore, and that's the balance of, where did all the good mentors go? Where did the support systems go to? All the celebrities, like, man, I want to just live my life. I don't want to be responsible for. Um, and a conversation that I had with one of now my mentors, and he's his 50s, so he don't understand what us as people are going through right now. Because now we're at a space where mentors are selecting who they want to be
Mental.
mentors to based on what they want to fulfill in their resume. So I help this many at-risk youth out. They don't just want to help somebody that may be like-minded or going in a similar direction. But that's the next conversation. And each week, if you look down in the description section, you'll see the conversations from for the series. So next week is, no one wants to be a role model anymore. And
Yep.
how has that harmed us? So any last minute thoughts or feelings or gripes you want to get out there?
Nah, I mean, I agree. I think this conversation is healthy,
Hmm.
super healthy. Two different perspectives, which is needed. Um,
Hmm.
as men, we have to learn to be able to. It's not about agreeing. Sometimes it's about understanding, and I think that
Hmm.
was the most important thing. Was I have an understanding of that older generation, because again, you have reverence for these images because a lot of those images were all a lot of these guys had. So now when you
Hmm.
get older, you got to learn some of these people weren't that, or some of these people weren't this. It's like you still acknowledge the truth, but it's still like, damn, you know what I mean? And for us, we are kind of in the same boat,
Hmm.
because it's just because of the internet, it's a lot easier for us to see the facade quicker. So we kind of don't have a reverence for anything.
Right.
So it's like, if it ain't 100% factual, we ain't riding for it. But for those older generations, y'all had to make a compromise we didn't have to make. So that's where I like this
Mhm.
conversation goes of, I got to understand that perspective a little more. So I think it was super healthy. And yeah, next week gonna be crazy. If this one goes like, if it goes like this one, it's gonna be crazy.
And piggybacking off of what you just said, as my last response is,
Mhm.
you're not always going to understand each other, because we're coming
Right.
from two different perspectives. But ultimately, communication, open communication, mutual communication,
Yeah.
but also the understanding that I'm just, I just want to be heard. Sometimes people want to be heard, and sometimes when you get certain thoughts out of your head, you're like, "Oh, that is some dumb shit. Let me
Right.
reel it back in." Or you hear yourself saying something out loud that's been just going around in your mind, and you find healing, because once it gets out of you, it no longer belongs to you. You can detach yourself from it. But sometimes people just want to be heard. And speaking as a Black man, sometimes you want to be heard without being told you're wrong or you're right, or this is the way Sometimes you just want to be heard by somebody. So to especially the fellas that are listening out there, you know, be able to articulate that to your friend circles, to the women that you may be around, your family. Sometimes I just want to be heard, and it's
Right.
not a sappy feeling, but if you never get to speak the thoughts that's on your mind, it begins to come out in your behavior, and you become defiant and rebellious because nobody is listening to you, or you're always in an argument because you don't feel heard. So,
Yeah.
we got to stop fighting for understanding and just let me hear you, hear me,
Yeah.
let me hear you, and we don't even have to have a resolution. We got it off our chest, or sometimes we do more help with ourselves, getting things outside of our mind,
Right.
our mindset, and I can see it now. I can hear it out loud, and I'm listening to you without, like you said, judging or um, always having a comeback, or you know, sometimes just listen, just hear somebody out.
Right. No, I
So
stand on. I 100% agree with that.
So this has been a great conversation. The Media
Yeah.
Hub, I'm trying to do more of these spotlight uh, things with individuals like Alan, and seeing how we can move forward and just make this a great space for everybody. As I build the Artist Exchange Media Hub up, if you don't know, for the last 10 years, I've been on another platform, and I just had to break free and really do things for me since the start of the Artist Exchange, maybe twice as long ago. I just wanted a space for people to be able to create a safe space where they can communicate, network, and just develop this positive images. I'm working on an event where we can come together as the Artist Exchange Media Hub and bring on new spaces. So if you want to be a part of a series, if you have some themes and some messages that you want to get out there, definitely hit us up. Let people know where they can find you at on social media, Alan, and support
Yeah.
your podcast.
If you want to tune in the Nerd Rap podcast, like I said, through the Anchor.fm app, it's
Mm-hmm.
on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify,
Mm-hmm.
any large streaming platform. All of my episodes are on. And I do my lives on Facebook while I record the episodes. So if you follow me on Facebook, Alan Jr., you'll be able to see the videos when I do them the day of and get feedback and stuff. And Black Dog Comics on Instagram, where you can see on my comic book stuff and stuff like that. But yeah, just check me out, and salute for you having me. First off, it was an honor.
Anytime, anytime.
It was
So
definitely an
just
honor.
try to make us both great and just doing whatever we have to do to get to that point. So next week, we're trying to do this every Friday around this time. So if you tune in, please like, share, subscribe. Go to his page. He's linked in the bio section. So go to him on Facebook and like his page and follow his movement as well. And we'll do our best to continue to push it out and share it and like it. So we'll see you next week. Peace out, people.
Artist Exchange.
The Artist Exchange. The Artist Exchange. The Artist Exchange.
The Artist Exchange.
Artist Exchange Live.
The Artist Exchange. Artist Exchange.
The Artist Exchange.
Starts now.
Artist Exchange.